Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. The leather-bound wine menu trembled slightly in Earl Vincent's hands as he watched his wife of 20 years text beneath the white tablecloth. The soft glow of her phone screen reflected in her expertly applied makeup, casting shadows that made her look older than her 43 years. He set down the menu with deliberate care, noting how Monique didn't even glance up at the sound. "I was thinking of ordering the 82 Bordeaux," Earl said, his deep voice carrying easily across the intimate table. "It was the year we met at Stanford." "Oh, whatever you think is best, darling." Monique's fingers continued their dance across her phone screen, her wedding ring catching the light of the restaurant's crystal chandelier. Earl studied her with the same analytical vision he'd used to build Vincent Medical Technologies from a startup in his garage to a billion-dollar enterprise. The signs had been there for months: the late nights at the office, the new wardrobe, the sudden interest in squash, his brother Derek's favorite sport. The final piece had clicked when Derek started missing their weekly games and board meetings. The waiter approached, a young man with carefully styled hair and an eager smile. "Have you decided on the wine, Mr. Vincent?" "The Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1982, Earl said, maintaining his composure as Monique's phone buzzed again. "And please tell Chef Marcus I appreciate him opening the restaurant for us on a Sunday. Our 20th anniversary deserved something special." This at least made Monique look up, a flash of something: guilt, annoyance, crossing her features before she forced a smile. 20 years. Can you believe it, darling? "I'm starting to," Earl thought. But outwardly he just smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. The restaurant around them hummed with the quiet efficiency of a place that catered to Silicon Valley's elite. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco's lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. "Derek sends his regrets," Monique said suddenly, her French accent slightly more pronounced than usual. A tell Earl had learned meant she was nervous. "He's still working on the neural interface technology software launch. You know how dedicated he is." "Dedicated," Earl repeated, tasting the word like a sommelier sampling the suspicious vintage. "Yes, he's been very dedicated lately. Missing our weekly squash games. Working late." He paused, watching her reaction. "Often in the PR department, I hear." Monique's laugh was too bright, too quick. "Well, of course. The neural interface technology launch is the biggest thing Vincent Medical has ever done. We need perfect coordination between development and PR." The waiter returned with the wine, performing the ritual of presentation and tasting with practiced grace. Earl approved it with a nod, watching as Monique's glass was filled. She lifted it immediately, taking a larger sip than the expensive vintage deserved. "To 20 years, Earl said, raising his glass, "and to honesty between brothers." Monique's hand trembled slightly as she clinked her glass against his. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, Earl caught a glimpse of the message preview. "D. Need to see you tonight. Crucial about the launch." "Something important?" Earl asked mildly. "Just work," Monique said quickly, too quickly. "You know how it is before a major launch." The rest of the dinner passed in a fog of forced small talk and lengthy silences. Monique barely touched her Wagyu beef, instead pushing it around her plate while constantly checking her phone. Earl ate methodically, each bite carefully chewed and swallowed past the knot in his throat. He'd built his empire on attention to detail, and now those same observation skills were showing him exactly how his marriage was crumbling. As they drove home in Earl's Tesla Model S, a car chosen for its quiet efficiency rather than flash, unlike Derek's Italian sports cars, Monique grew increasingly agitated. "I need to go back to the office," she said as they pulled into their circular driveway. "There's some last-minute press release work for the launch." At 11:00 p.m., Earl's voice remained steady, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The European markets open soon. We need to have everything perfect." Monique was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Don't wait up, darling." Earl watched her hurry to her own car, not bothering to change out of her evening dress. As her taillights disappeared down their private drive, he pulled out his phone and opened a secure app few knew existed on his device. Years in cybersecurity had taught him the value of preparation, and the tracking software he'd installed weeks ago showed Monique's car heading not toward the office, but to Derek's downtown penthouse. Inside his home office, Earl sat in the darkness, the only light coming from his multiple monitors. On one screen, he pulled up the company's internal communications logs. Another showed security camera feeds. The third displayed his brother's recent financial transactions. The house felt empty without Jay, who was away at boarding school. Earl had initially resisted sending him, but now he was grateful his son wasn't here to witness what was coming. At 16, Jay was already showing signs of inheriting his father's analytical mind, though lately he'd been distant, talking more about Uncle Derek's cool projects than his father's work. At midnight, Earl's phone pinged with an alert. Monique was making a call from Derek's apartment. Through the building's security system, installed by a subsidiary of Vincent Medical, Earl could hear her words clearly. "Once the software launches, everything changes," she whispered, her voice eager. Earl suspects nothing. He's too focused on his precious code to see what's happening right in front of him. A man's voice responded, too distant to hear clearly, but Earl recognized his brother's laugh. Earl leaned back in his chair, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors. He opened his private server, the one even Derek didn't know about, and began documenting everything. Years of practice kept his hand steady as he typed, even as his world shifted on its axis. The next morning, Vincent Medical's offices buzzed with pre-launch energy. Earl walked through the glass-walled corridors, nodding to employees who scrambled to look busy as he passed. His custom-made suit and carefully composed expression gave no hint of his sleepless night. "Good morning, Mr. Vincent." His assistant, Sarah Chun, fell into step beside him. She'd been with him for 15 years, one of the few people he trusted completely. "Your brother called to reschedule today's board meeting again. Did he give a reason?" Sarah hesitated. "Miss Vincent, Monique, said he's meeting with potential investors." "I see." Earl stopped at his office door. "Sarah, I need you to pull some files for me." Discreetly. Everything related to the neural interface technology project, security protocols, calls, and get me Howard from legal. "Of course." Sarah paused. "Sir, is everything all right?" Earl's smile was genuine this time. "Just being thorough, Sarah. We've worked too hard to leave anything to chance." Throughout the day, Earl maintained his routine with mechanical precision. He reviewed code, met with department heads, and approved marketing materials. If he noticed how Monique's office remained empty until noon, or how Derek's signature was missing from crucial documents, he gave no sign. The next 2 days passed in a similar fashion. Earl gathered data, watched, and waited. He saw how Derek swaggered through the offices, accepting congratulations for the upcoming launch as if he'd written the code himself. He noticed how Monique touched Derek's arm when they thought no one was looking, how they disappeared into conference rooms for emergency meetings. He also saw what they didn't: the worried looks from longtime employees, the whispered conversations that stopped when either approached, the way Sarah's lips tightened every time Derek's name was mentioned. On the third day, exactly 72 hours before the scheduled launch, Earl was reviewing security footage in his home office when he heard Monique's heels clicking down the hallway. Her perfume, different from her usual scent, preceded her into the room. "We need to talk," she announced, not bothering with a greeting. Her voice carried none of its usual warmth. Earl turned slowly in his chair. "Do we?" "Don't be difficult, Earl." Monique strode to his desk, her Louboutin striking the hardwood like a judge's gavel. "You're a smart man. You must have noticed things are different." "Different," Earl repeated, his voice neutral. "Like my brother missing board meetings, or my wife coming home at 3 a.m. smelling like his cologne." A flash of surprise crossed Monique's face before being replaced by something harder, more calculated. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here's how it's going to be," she declared, tossing the envelope onto his desk. Legal documents spilled out. "Divorce papers," Earl noted with clinical detachment. "Derek needs me during his divorce. I'm moving into his penthouse, and we'll spend our nights however we want. He really needs this." Earl reached for his phone, but Monique's laugh stopped him, a sharp, cruel sound he'd never heard from her before. "Don't bother calling the family," she said, triumph evident in her voice. "They've known about us for months. They think we're perfect together. The creative genius and the woman who truly appreciates him." She leaned forward, her expensive perfume cloying in the enclosed space. "Face it, Earl. You were always the boring brother." Earl's face remained impassive as he looked at the woman he'd spent 20 years with. "Is that what he told you? That he has vision? He doesn't just tell me. He shows me." Monique's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Did you know he's been working on partnerships that could triple the company's value?" "Of course not. You're too busy checking and rechecking code like a glorified programmer." "And these partnerships," Earl said carefully, "they wouldn't happen to involve our Chinese competitors, would they?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Monique's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No." Earl turned one of his monitors toward her. On the screen, a series of emails was displayed, all in Chinese. "My boring attention to detail includes learning Mandarin, Monique. Useful for international business, and for reading correspondence about selling proprietary software." Monique's composure cracked slightly before she rallied. "You're paranoid. This is exactly why Derek needs to take a larger role. You see conspiracies everywhere. It's not paranoia if they're really plotting against you." Earl's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Tell me, does Derek know you've been documenting his cocaine use for the past year, or that you've been photographing his meetings with certain individuals? The SEC would be very interested." The color drained from Monique's face. "How did you?" "The same way I know about the offshore account you opened last month. The one you think I can't trace." Earl stood slowly. "You forgot something crucial, Monique. Before I was CEO, before I built this company, I worked in cybersecurity. The boring brother knows how to watch the watchers." "You're bluffing," Monique snapped, but her hand trembled as she clutched her bag. "And even if you're not, it doesn't matter. The family supports us. They understand that Derek and I love each other." Earl's laugh was soft, but held no humor. "The way you loved me when my first company failed. When Derek was living in our pool house, borrowing money he never repaid. Or the way you love him now, when you think he's about to become CEO." Monique took a step back, then seemed to remember herself. She straightened, her chin lifting. "Sign the papers, Earl. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Think about Jay." "I always think about Jay." Earl sat back down, his movements deliberate. "That's why I'm going to give you one chance, Monique. One chance to walk away quietly with the generous settlement outlined in our prenuptial agreement. The agreement you called paranoid, remember?" "Or what?" Monique's voice dripped with contempt. "You'll try to ruin us. Good luck. Derek has copies of everything. One wrong move from you, and certain rumors about your stability start circulating. How do you think the board will react to concerns about their CEO's mental state, right before the biggest launch in company history?" Earl simply looked at her, his expression unchanged. "You should go pack, Monique. Derek's waiting." "You're pathetic," she spat, storming out of the room. Earl waited until he heard her car start before picking up his phone. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, "implementation code F9. And please clear my schedule for the evening. I need to visit my parents." The drive to his parents' Victorian home in Pacific Heights took longer than usual, giving Earl time to process what he'd learned. His mother's garden, meticulously maintained for 40 years, seemed to mock the family's disarray with its perfect order. Inside, he found what he expected: his parents in the living room, his sister Kate pacing by the window. They looked up with varying degrees of guilt as he entered. "Earl," his mother started, "we can explain." "Can you?" Earl remained standing, looking at the family photos on the mantel. "Can you explain lending Derek money for months? Or covering for Monique's absences at family events? Or maybe you can explain why my teenage son is being told that his uncle will be a better father figure." Kate stopped pacing. "How did you?" "I know everything," Earl said, his voice cold. "The loans, the lies, the late-night meetings. I know about Derek's fake divorce proceedings. Did you know he's been divorced for 2 years? I know about the money he's embezzled, the secrets he sold. I know how he and Monique laughed about manipulating all of you." "That's not possible," his father protested. "Derek said the money was for research. He showed us the proposal." "Forgeries," Earl said quietly. "Like the documents he used to convince you I was planning to sell the company. Like the stories he told Jay about me abandoning projects that could help people." His mother began to cry. "We thought he seemed so passionate about his ideas, and Monique said you were becoming distant, paranoid." "Of course she did." Earl's voice held no accusation, just tired certainty. "They played their parts well. The charismatic brother, the concerned wife, all worried about boring, obsessive Earl." "Oh God," Kate whispered, sinking into a chair. "The things we said to you. The way we treated you." Earl watched his family absorb the truth, seeing the moment realization dawned on each face. He thought of Jay, away at school, believing his father cared more about profits than progress. He thought of Derek and Monique, probably celebrating their triumph right now. "What are you going to do?" his father asked finally. Earl straightened his cuffs, a gesture so familiar, so unchanged in this altered world. "What I always do, Dad. Pay attention to the details." As he drove home that night, Earl's phone lit up with a text from Monique. "Moved my things out. Hope you enjoy rattling around that big house alone. Derek says you have 24 hours to sign the papers before things get complicated." Earl didn't respond. Instead, he pulled into his garage and walked through his quiet house to his office. The monitors glowed in welcome as he sat down, his fingers moving across the keyboards with practiced efficiency. On one screen, security footage showed Derek and Monique entering his penthouse, champagne in hand. On another, lines of code scrolled past. The neural interface technology project's true version, not the compromised one Derek thought he'd stolen. The third displayed a series of encrypted emails to carefully chosen recipients. Earl Vincent smiled in the blue light of his screens and began to type. The server room hummed with the quiet efficiency of well-maintained machines, its climate-controlled atmosphere, a sharp contrast to the emotional storm of the past few days. Earl sat alone in the dim glow of multiple monitors, following digital breadcrumbs through Vincent Medical's secure servers. "Found you, little brother," he murmured, his eyes narrowing at the screen. A series of encrypted communications flickered past, emails and file transfers to an IP address in Shenzhen. Derek had been careful, but not careful enough. He'd used his executive override codes to access sensitive neural interface technology documentation, leaving tiny digital fingerprints that only someone with Earl's background would notice. Sarah Chun appeared at the server room door, her usual professional demeanor tinged with concern. "Sir, the IT team is asking questions about the Level 7 security scan you initiated. Tell them it's a routine pre-launch protocol." Earl's eyes never left the screen. "And Sarah, flag any attempts to access the development servers from Derek or Monique's credentials. Don't block them, just log everything." "Of course." Sarah hesitated. "Mr. Vincent, Miss Haas's office called again. They say it's urgent." Earl allowed himself a small smile. Ginger Haas's reputation for handling tech industry divorces was well earned, but she'd have to wait. First, he needed proof that would stand up in both corporate and criminal courts. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a message from Derek. "Board meeting tomorrow. Time to discuss your retirement. Big brother, for the good of the company." Earl didn't respond. Instead, he pulled up another window, this one showing email correspondence between Monique's PR department and several tech journalists. She'd been laying groundwork for months, planting subtle hints about his increasing isolation and obsessive behavior. One draft article, scheduled for release after the launch, already had a quote from Derek about his deep concern for his brother's well-being. "Amateur hour," Earl muttered, copying the files to his secure server. In the PR world, a paper trail was as good as a signed confession. The next morning, Vincent Medical's gleaming headquarters buzzed with pre-launch energy. Earl moved through the corridors with deliberate calm, noting how employees quickly looked away when he passed. Monique's whisper campaign had been effective. They were already treating him like a man on his way out. Derek's corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art, screamed new money. He looked up from his desk with a predator's smile as Earl entered. "Earl, just the man I wanted to see." Derek's designer suit couldn't quite hide his stockier build. He'd always resented being the shorter brother. "Have you looked over those retirement papers I sent?" "Actually," Earl settled into a chair, his posture relaxed. "I've been reviewing some interesting server logs. Care to explain why you've been accessing neural interface technology source code at 3 a.m.? Derek's smile flickered. "As CFO, I have every right to review company assets. And the emails to Shenzhen. That's just market research." Derek leaned forward, his facade of friendliness cracking. "Monique's documented your paranoid accusations. One wrong move, and the board sees evidence of your deteriorating mental state. Is that how you want to end your career? In a psychiatric evaluation?" Earl's laugh was genuine. "You always were terrible at chess, Derek. Too focused on the pieces in front of you, never seeing the whole board." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about the offshore accounts, the fake divorce proceedings, the cocaine habit you think you're hiding." Earl stood slowly. "It means I have recordings of you and Monique planning to sell our technology to competitors. And it means you're still thinking 3 moves ahead while I'm playing an entirely different game." The color drained from Derek's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Earl straightened his tie. "Check your primary offshore account, the one in the Caymans." Derek's fingers flew across his keyboard. Earl watched his brother's expression shift from confidence to confusion to fear. "What did you do?" Derek's voice cracked. "Nothing." Yet, Earl adjusted his cuffs. "The neural interface technology launch is in 3 days. A lot can happen in 3 days." He left Derek staring at his computer screen, sweat beading on his forehead. In the elevator, Earl checked his watch. Right on schedule. The boardroom was already full when Earl arrived for the emergency meeting he'd quietly arranged. 8 pairs of eyes watched him take his seat at the head of the table. These were old money investors, venture capitalists, and tech veterans who had backed Vincent Medical from its early days. They understood the value of stability. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Earl began, his voice measured. "What I'm about to show you requires absolute discretion." For the next hour, he laid out his evidence. Emails proving Derek's contact with Chinese competitors, financial records showing systematic theft disguised as research costs, and recordings of Monique discussing plans to blame data leaks on Earl's instability. "My God," whispered Jonathan Chun, the longest-serving board member. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to protect the company." Earl brought up a final document on the display screen. "This is the real neural interface technology source code. What Derek thinks he's been stealing is a sophisticated decoy." The board members exchanged glances. These were people who had built their fortunes by recognizing calculated risks. They understood exactly what they were seeing. "What do you need from us?" asked Victoria Reeves, her silver hair catching the light. "A delay of the launch," Earl replied. "Officially for a security audit. Unofficially, to let certain interested parties complete their investigations." Understanding dawned on their faces. Several nodded appreciatively. "All in favor?" Jonathan asked. The vote was unanimous. Earl's next stop was Ginger Haas's office in the financial district. The lawyer's reputation for ruthlessness was reflected in her minimalist workspace, all steel, glass, and sharp edges. "You're a surprise," Ginger said, reviewing his evidence. "Most men in your position let emotion cloud their judgment. But this," she gestured at the files, "this is beautiful. Clinical." "I prefer thorough," Earl replied. "Thorough works." Ginger's smile was razor-sharp. "Your prenup is solid, but with this evidence of corporate conspiracy, we can make sure Monique walks away with nothing but regrets. And Derek? Corporate espionage, wire fraud, conspiracy. He's looking at federal time. Unless he runs," Earl said. Ginger nodded. "He'll run. It's what he does." Back at the office, Earl found Sarah waiting with more news. "Sir, Derek's been trying to access the development servers, and Monique's been calling emergency meetings with the PR team." "Right on schedule," Earl said, checking his watch. "How many people have they contacted?" 17 journalists, 3 industry analysts, and a psychiatric consultant." "Good." Earl sat at his desk, the weight of 20 years of marriage and brotherhood settling around him like a familiar coat. "Sarah, implement Protocol Omega. It's time to spring the trap." The next 2 days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Derek grew increasingly desperate as his access to various systems mysteriously failed. Monique's attempts to plant stories about Earl's mental state met with unexpected skepticism from journalists who had received anonymous evidence of her affair and conspiracy. The morning of the launch dawned clear and cold. Vincent Medical's auditorium was packed with press, investors, and employees. Derek and Monique sat in the front row, their manufactured confidence beginning to crack around the edges. Earl took the stage to enthusiastic applause. Looking every inch the successful CEO in his perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair adding gravitas to his appearance. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Vincent Medical has always prided itself on innovation and integrity, which is why today's announcement may come as a surprise." Derek shifted in his seat. Monique's knuckles whitened around her tablet. "In light of certain security concerns, we're implementing a comprehensive audit of all our projects, including the Neural Interface Technology Initiative." The audience murmured. Earl held up a hand for silence. "Our commitment to excellence requires us to be certain that every aspect of our technology is protected. To that end, we're cooperating fully with federal authorities in an investigation into potential corporate espionage." As if on cue, suits appeared at every exit. Derek's face went ash-white as he recognized the FBI badges. Monique fumbled with her phone, presumably discovering that her access to the company and joint accounts had been suspended. "This is insane." Derek stood, his composure finally cracking. Earl's mental state has been deteriorating for months. Ask anyone. He's been making paranoid accusations, seeing conspiracies everywhere. Earl smiled slightly. "Interesting choice of words, Derek. Would you like to explain these emails to our competitors in Shenzhen? Or should we ask Monique about the PR campaign she's been preparing to explain away the theft of our technology?" The room erupted in chaos. Journalists shouted questions as FBI agents moved forward. Derek looked wildly around before bolting for a side exit. He made it 3 steps before security stopped him. Monique stood frozen, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. "You can't do this," she whispered as Earl passed her. "The family," Earl finished quietly. "They know everything, including Jay. Especially Jay." He watched as she crumpled into her seat, mascara streaking her cheeks. The woman who had shared his bed for 20 years, who had thought him too boring to notice her betrayal, finally saw him clearly. In his office later that day, Earl sat with Sarah, watching the fallout unfold on multiple screens. Derek was in custody, already offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Monique had locked herself in her office, presumably calling the divorce lawyer she had assumed would destroy Earl's life instead of hers. "Sir," Sarah said softly, "your son is on line 1. Earl picked up the phone, bracing himself. "Jay." Dad. His son's voice cracked. Uncle Derek. He told me you were going to shut down the medical research, that you only cared about profits. But I just saw the news. I know, son. Earl's voice remained gentle. Jay hesitated. Can I come home? I mean, not just for a weekend. I want to transfer back to prep school here. Of course. Earl felt something tight in his chest, loosened slightly. We'll arrange it tomorrow. After hanging up, Earl stood at his office window, watching the sun set over San Francisco Bay. Behind him, the monitors showed Derek being led away in handcuffs, Monique facing a barrage of reporters, and the company's stock price holding steady despite the scandal. Sarah appeared at his door again. Sir, the board would like to know if you're still planning to attend tonight's emergency session. Earl straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the window, and nodded. Of course, we have a company to run. As he walked to the boardroom, employees stopped to watch him pass. This time, their gazes held respect rather than speculation. The boring brother, the careful planner, the man they had underestimated, had shown his true nature. The trap had sprung perfectly, but Earl knew this was just the beginning. There would be court battles, PR wars, and family wounds to heal. But he had built his empire on attention to detail, on seeing the long game, and he was very, very good at chess. Vincent Medical's boardroom crackled with tension as 8 board members sat in leather chairs, reviewing the evidence spread before them. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating printed emails, financial records, and surveillance transcripts. A paper trail of betrayal that led directly to Derek Vincent's office. The scope of this, it's staggering, Jonathan Chun said, setting down a particularly damning document. He wasn't just selling secrets. He was trying to hollow out the company from the inside. Earl Vincent stood at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but commanding. The neural interface technology source code he attempted to steal was a sophisticated decoy. The real project remained secure. Victoria Reeves, her silver hair gleaming, leaned forward. And you're certain about his involvement with the Chinese competitors. The evidence speaks for itself. Earl pressed a button on his tablet, and a recording filled the room. Derek's voice, slightly slurred. Once the launch happens, we'll be set. The buyers already have the preliminary specs. Earl's too busy checking code to notice what's right under his nose. Monique's laugh followed. The board will believe anything once they see my documentation of his mental decline. Poor paranoid Earl, seeing conspiracies everywhere. Earl stopped the recording. There's more. Hours of it. The board members exchanged glances. These were people who had built fortunes by recognizing threats and opportunities. They understood exactly what they were hearing. I move for an immediate vote on Derek Vincent's position as CFO, Jonathan said, his voice hard. All in favor. 8 hands rose without hesitation. The vote is unanimous, Victoria declared, per the company charter's Article 7, Section 3, which Earl so prudently updated last year. Derek's shares must be sold back to the company at their original purchase price, a fraction of their current value, Jonathan added with grim satisfaction. Earl allowed himself a small smile. Sarah, please escort the FBI agents in. They'll want to see this. The corporate fallout was swift and absolute. News of Derek's arrest spread through the building like wildfire. Employees gathered in clusters, whispering as federal agents carried boxes of evidence from his office. Monique barricaded herself in the PR department, frantically trying to salvage her carefully crafted narrative. Her phone calls to journalists went unanswered. They had all received anonymous packets documenting her role in the conspiracy. You can't do this, she screamed when security came to escort her out. I built this company's image. I control the narrative. The truth isn't a narrative, Monique, Earl said quietly, watching from the doorway. It's just the truth. That evening, Earl's Tesla pulled up to his parents' Victorian home in Pacific Heights. The family meeting he'd called couldn't wait, not with reporters already circling. His mother opened the door, her face drawn. "Earl, what's happening?" "We saw the news. Let's talk inside." Earl carried a laptop under his arm. "Is everyone here?" They gathered in the living room. His parents, his sister Kate, and Jay, who had flown in from boarding school. The same room where they had once conspired behind his back now transformed into a court of reckoning. Earl opened his laptop and connected it to the TV. "Before we begin, I want you to listen to something." Derek's voice filled the room. "Mom and Dad are so easy to play. A few tears about research costs, and they're writing checks they never verify. Just like they never verified Earl was trying to kill the medical research." Monique's voice followed. "And Jay, God, that kid is gullible. Uncle Derek understands the future. Your dad only cares about money. He believes everything we tell him." Their laughter, cruel and clear, cut through the room. Earl's mother began to cry. His father's face had gone gray. Kate stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "There's more," Earl said, his voice gentle but firm. "Derek's been divorced for 2 years. The proceedings he used to justify the affair were fabricated. The money you lent him, it went to offshore accounts and cocaine." "No," his father whispered. "He showed us the court documents." "Forgeries," Earl said, pulling up images on the screen. "Here are the real divorce records. And here are his bank statements, showing where your money really went." Jay stood abruptly, his teenage face twisted with betrayal. "I trusted him. He said you were blocking research that could help people." "He was trying to sell our technology to competitors," Earl finished. "He never cared about helping people, Jay. Only himself." The truth landed like body blows. Earl watched his family absorb each revelation, seeing the moment their support for Derek and Monique crumbled under the weight of evidence. "The things we said to you," Kate whispered. "The way we treated you. It's in the past," Earl said firmly. "But you needed to know the truth. All of it." Later that week, Earl sat in Ginger Haas's office, reviewing divorce proceedings. The lawyer's smile was predatory as she outlined their position. "Monique's trying to claim half the company's value," Ginger said. "But her documented conspiracy makes that impossible. The prenup you insisted on, it's ironclad. And with the criminal charges pending, she gets nothing." "Less than nothing," Earl said. "She'll be lucky to stay out of prison." News came the next morning. Derek had fled. His passport had been flagged at Shanghai International Airport. "He's running to his buyers," Sarah reported, standing in Earl's office. "But they won't be there," Earl finished. "I made sure of that." Weeks passed. The company stabilized. The real neural interface technology project proceeded under heightened security. Earl managed the crisis with his usual methodical precision, his public image transforming from boring brother to tech industry vigilant. Then came the email from Shanghai. Derek, desperate. The buyers disappeared. Accounts emptied. Monique's furious. "We're living in a one-room apartment, and she won't stop crying. Please, Earl, help us. Come home." Earl archived the email without replying. A year later, Earl stood at a podium, announcing Vincent Medical's official launch of the neural interface technology software. The audience applauded as he outlined plans to donate millions to medical research. Jay stood beside him, home from his first year of medical school, his face proud as he watched his father. Their relationship had emerged stronger from the crucible of betrayal. In his office that evening, Earl looked at the wedding photos still sitting on his desk. Monique smiled out at him, young and beautiful, before greed and ambition had twisted her into something unrecognizable. Sarah appeared at his door. "Sir, your dinner reservation is in 30 minutes, and there's a message from Shanghai. Archive it with the others." Earl straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the window. Outside, San Francisco glittered in the dusk, as bright and hard as ambition itself. The boring brother had won, not through dramatic gestures or grand confrontations, but through patience, precision, and attention to detail. Just as he built his company, just as he protected it, He picked up the wedding photo, started to drop it in the shredder, then stopped. No, it would stay on his desk, not for sentiment, but as a reminder that sometimes the quiet ones, the careful ones, the ones others underestimate, are the most dangerous of all. In a small apartment in Shanghai, Derek taught English to bored businessmen while fighting extradition. Monique took the subway to her job at a tourist agency, her designer clothes long since sold. Her dreams of wealth and power had been reduced to sharing instant noodles in a tiny kitchen. Sometimes, late at night, they talked about what went wrong, about how they had misread Earl so completely. But by then, it was far too late. The boring brother had changed the game while they were still learning the rules. 5 years later, the Shanghai summer was oppressive, the kind of heat that turned tiny apartments into ovens. Monique Vincent, now using her maiden name, Dubois, stood at a grimy window, watching tourists shuffle past on the street below. Her once manicured hands were raw from cleaning hotel rooms. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by discount store uniforms. The extradition papers came through, Derek announced, slumping onto their worn couch. His English teaching job barely covered rent, and legal fees had drained what little they'd salvage. "They're processing the request," Monique asked, not turning from the window. "Earl. Who else?" Derek's laugh was bitter. 5 years, and he's still hunting us. The boring brother never forgets. Their life had become a cautionary tale in Silicon Valley. Occasional news stories tracked their fall. The former CFO teaching basic English to children, the PR executive turned hotel maid. Their love story had crumbled under the weight of poverty and mutual recrimination. Meanwhile, Vincent Medical Technologies had soared. The neural interface technology software revolutionized medical data processing, earning accolades and billions in revenue. Earl's donation of millions to medical research garnered international praise, his reputation transforming from careful executive to visionary philanthropist. 10 years later, the Vincent Medical Technology headquarters had expanded, now occupying 3 gleaming towers in San Francisco's skyline. Earl Vincent, his hair now fully silver, stood at his office window, watching the sunset paint the bay in gold. "Dad." Jay Vincent entered, his white coat exchanged for a business suit. After finishing medical school, he had joined the company's research division, eventually rising to chief medical officer. "The new neural mapping project results just came in. It's even better than we hoped." Earl smiled at his son, no longer the manipulated teenager, but a confident man of 28. "Your mother called again," he said quietly. From Paris. After 3 years in Shanghai, Monique had left Derek, using her French citizenship to escape to Paris. She worked as a tour guide, living in a small apartment in the unfashionable 20th arrondissement. Her monthly emails to Jay went unanswered. Derek hadn't fared better. The Chinese competitors he tried to sell to had blacklisted him after Earl's warnings. He moved between Asian cities, teaching English and dodging extradition. His charismatic swagger had been replaced by desperate survival. "I delete her emails," Jay said firmly. "She and Derek showed us who they really were. I learned it from you." 15 years later, Earl Vincent, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, sat in the company's main auditorium. The occasion was historic. Vincent Medical Technologies was launching its most ambitious project yet, a neural interface that could help paralyzed patients regain movement. In the front row sat familiar faces. Sarah Chun, now CEO, led the company while Earl served as chairman. Her loyalty had been rewarded with a meteoric rise. Victoria Reeves and Jonathan Chun remained on the board, their faith in Earl's leadership vindicated many times over. Kate, Earl's sister, managed the company's charitable foundation, channeling her guilt over past betrayals into tireless work helping others. The presentation began with a video showing patients walking again, families reunited, lives transformed. The neural interface technology had evolved far beyond its origins, becoming something truly revolutionary. A news alert flashed on Earl's phone. Former Vincent Medical CFO Derek Vincent found dead in Bangkok hotel. apparent suicide. Earl quietly archived the message. Derek's final years had been a downward spiral: extradition threats, poverty, and burned bridges. In the end, the charismatic brother had died alone, his schemes long since unraveled. 20 years later, the medical technology world gathered in Stockholm to witness Earl Vincent, now 80, receive the Nobel Prize in Medicine. The neural interface technology had evolved into a system that helped millions, from paralyzed patients to those with neurological disorders. Jay sat in the front row with his wife and children, beaming with pride. He had helped develop the final iterations of the technology, proving himself not just as Earl's son, but as a brilliant researcher in his own right. Monique watched the ceremony on a small TV in her Paris apartment, aged and alone. Her attempts at reconciliation had met with silence. The prenup she had mocked left her with nothing. Her conspiracies had blocked any corporate career, and her beauty had faded with time. She survived on a small pension, writing unsent letters to the son who would never forgive her. 25 years later, Earl Vincent died peacefully in his sleep at 85, leaving behind a legacy that transformed medicine. The company he built, the lives he changed, and the family he protected all stood as a testament to the power of patience, precision, and principled leadership. His funeral drew thousands. Tech leaders, medical pioneers, and grateful patients came to honor the man who turned betrayal into triumph. Jay delivered the eulogy, speaking of his father's quiet strength, strategic brilliance, and unwavering moral compass. In a small Paris cafe, Monique read the news of Earl's death. The obituaries painted him as a visionary, a medical technology pioneer, a devoted father. None mentioned her name. She was a footnote, a cautionary tale, forgotten by the world that had once been her stage. The Vincent Medical Technology headquarters raised a new building, the Earl Vincent Center for Neural Research. In the lobby, beside his portrait, sat a familiar wedding photo, not as a memorial to lost love, but as Earl had intended. A reminder that greatness often comes quietly, and that true strength lies not in dramatic gestures, but in patient, methodical execution. Jay Vincent took his father's place as chairman, leading the company into new frontiers of medical technology. Sarah Chun continued as CEO, their partnership echoing the loyalty and trust that had defined Earl's leadership. The neural interface technology evolved into a global standard, helping millions walk, communicate, and live fuller lives. Hospitals worldwide used Vincent Medical Systems, the company's name becoming synonymous with medical innovation. Kate Vincent Chun expanded the charitable foundation's reach, building hospitals in underserved communities. Each bore a plaque with Earl's favorite quote: "Success is not about being underestimated. It's about being underestimated only once." Earl Vincent's story became a Harvard Business School case study in strategic leadership and corporate governance. Students analyzed how the boring brother outmaneuvered betrayal through careful planning and unwavering resolve. The company he built continued to thrive, its culture shaped by his principles: attention to detail, patient strategy, and ethical leadership. Derek and Monique's betrayal, meant to destroy him, had instead revealed his true strength. Their attempt to paint him as paranoid and unstable had backfired, exposing their own moral bankruptcy. In the end, Earl Vincent died as he had lived, on his own terms, his legacy secure, his principles vindicated. The boring brother, the careful planner, the man they had underestimated, had written himself into medical and business history. In corporate boardrooms, tech startups, and business schools, his story taught a crucial lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the loudest or most charismatic, but the quiet one who sees the whole board and plays the long game. The wedding photo remained on display in company headquarters, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that true strength often comes disguised as caution, and that real power lies not in bold strikes, but in patient strategy. Earl Vincent's epitaph, chosen by Jay, read simply, "He saw the whole game while others played their opening moves." It was enough. It had always been enough. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.